Welcome to Backstage with the Brand, the podcast where we stage dive into all things advertising, marketing, and branded content. I'm your host, Andy Weedland, and today I'm joined by Greg Johns, who is the EVP and Chief Digital Officer at Canvas Worldwide. What's up, Greg?
Oh, not a ton. Agency life being itself.
I know there's a ton going on, and still you made time for us. I'm super stoked you're here because you have the reputation as a guy with a POV. You're not shy about sharing your thoughts. You're very bright and accomplished and learned on things that I am not. So things like agency life, agency relationships, ad technologies. We're going to deep dive into all those things. Sound good?
There's a lot to talk about for sure.
There is. So let me just, for our listeners, share the agenda. I want to share your bio, and then I want to get into the state of the agency world and specifically independence in the market today. And then talk about the coming cookieless world and the concept of privacy as luxury. And then you spoke very eloquently about this idea of ideas and executions, which I'm really interested in diving into, as well as digital and TV in the media mix. And then I thought we'd wrap up with the future of cars and wine pairings. Does that sound good?
Yes.
Okay. All right, then. So, look, you're EVP and Chief Digital Officer at Canvas Worldwide, which is a very large independent agency, and you've been doing this for over 5 years. And when I look at your background, you've been at all the major holding companies. You're at Initiative and you're at Cara, and I'm wondering, how did you become such a data wonk and such a reputable person in the idea of data-driven marketing? And then I saw that you were Director of Media Technology Solutions for Omnicom and Director of Website Analytics at McCann. So you got bona fides, man.
It's been a bit of a varied journey, and I think that's part of what got me into a good position for being able to really chart the course for what digital has turned into first part of the 20s here. I started out on the web dev side, so analytics before anybody really knew what that meant. I was doing website analytics work on General Motors way back in 2000, 2001. It kind of had to, over and over again, remind people, don't say hits, say visits, say unique visitors. If you say hits, you don't know what you're talking about. And, kind of up the line. The web background that I started with gave me a good technical grounding when I moved into media, good God, 15 years ago. And I've been digital the entire time. And that looks a lot different now than it did when I started.
Well, look, I've been in digital for a very long time, and 20 years ago, digital was the redheaded stepchild of media, and now guys like you are EVP at Canvas, and not just digital, but looking at the entire media mix.
Well, it was not necessarily the redheaded stepchild as much as the precocious youngster that everybody else didn't know what to do with, so let it play in its own corner. But as is often the case for good marketers, when consumers start to change their behavior, a good marketer sits up, notices, and starts to change the way they do things. And so it really was about 10, 11 years ago where digital moved out of that, it's, that 10% of the budget over there conversation and more into the forefront. I worked in automotive in 2000, 2010. And you did start to see car companies doing digital only launches. They were probably not quite ready for prime time at that point, given the capabilities of digital, given the consumer behavior. But nowadays, you see that as the norm.
Yeah, I see that. I do think that automotive advertisers do love their TV and they show the car and it's zipping around the corners and the leaves and it's just gorgeous. But I also imagine that they're trying to drive intent and demand. And so digital is a great platform to do that.
Nobody can argue that video remains powerful, and I will say this as somebody grounded in digital for 20 plus years, there's still no substitute for a 55-inch screen that somebody's paying attention to. If you've known me for a while, you've heard me say that line a few times. But, yes, there has to be a well-rounded approach. This is not something simply for automotive. This is what, a lot of industries are grappling with now, as, not only more and more of the consumer's discovery of products and services is happening online, the research, obviously, and especially accelerated in the past 12 months, increasingly that fulfillment is being done in a digital capacity as well. So thinking about all the different mediums and how they work together in a digital fashion, becomes critical to success.
So before we get into sort of digital automotive marketing, which I really want to dive into, I'm really interested in you as EVP and Chief Digital Officer working for one of the largest independent ad agencies. And you're going up against these huge holding companies, which you know because you used to work there. What are the advantages of being an independent in today's market?
Well, I think that especially in the last 12 months, they've said COVID changes a lot when it comes to how marketing is looked at. Clients definitely are trying to broaden their approach to their services. And, independents can move a bit differently than holding companies. We're not necessarily beholden to the same economic forces that holding companies are. You've seen over the last 12 months that, holding companies, virtually all of them, are thinking hard about how to reshape their business. Are you a consulting company? Do you want to go after McKinsey or Accenture? Do you need to kind of strip away some of the fat that unfortunately has built up over the years? There's a lot of rethink going on there. You wouldn't call it necessarily right sizing. I don't know if that's necessarily the approach, but they do need to see the world a bit differently and organize accordingly. An independent has a bit more freedom in being able to do that.
So you mentioned COVID, and I don't think on any level COVID's a good thing, but it does make us work and think differently. Have you seen any changes in the last year that's going to make you a better agency for your clients?
Well, I do think that number one, clients see the value in being able to be flexible. I mean, you had no choice in March of 2020 when all of a sudden the world looked differently in the span of a week than anybody had ever seen. And I do think that is something that will stick, is that need to be more flexible and more agile. I will issue the disclaimer that some of my opinions aren't necessarily those of my agency, of course, but I do believe that in many ways we will see the market shift farther away from this year-long planning upfront type of mentality and more to one that is going to require agility, one that's more digital, really. And, you know, something that I think everybody needs to really wrap their arms around is the idea that digital is not simply a screen. Digital is a way of doing things. It's a philosophy, if you will. And increasingly, there is no media channel that digital doesn't touch. If you think of digital as a smartphone, a laptop, or a tablet, then you're not necessarily getting the larger picture of what's going on.
So, I mean, COVID has made you more agile and flexible for your clients. I imagine that you expect the same from your partners. When I say partners, I mean like publishers or media companies or ad tech companies. Like, what are you asking these partners when you say I want you to be more agile and interoperable and flexible? Like, what are your expectations, and what can we do to be better partners to you and to your clients?
Well, I'm going to say that the partner community for us has very much demonstrated flexibility and agility for a number of years. Certainly not universal, and certainly is something that at the end of the day, it's going to go back to a supply and demand curve. All right, and if you are a lucky enough partner to be on top of something where scarcity exists, well, you have more of a remit and economic license to be a little more inflexible. But I do think that the idea that businesses are going to be, I don't want to say more reactive, but they're going to be able to continue to ingest data at a faster rate. They're going to be able to continue to apply technology to really wring a lot more out of that data than has been conventionally possible. As we see that, companies will become more adept at making changes quickly. And the partners that are able to exist alongside that mentality are going to be the partners that stand a great chance of building with those businesses. The DTC companies, we all laud them for a number of different reasons, but part of what is an ingredient in their success has been the idea that they are reacting more efficiently to data. I won't necessarily say more quickly. I'll say more efficiently to data and building their businesses accordingly.
Well, it's an interesting thing because when I think of digital, I think of unlimited supply. And then when I think of being valuable to agencies and clients, it's creating something that they can't get anywhere else. And so those things are sort of contradictory things, but it kind of leads us into the data discussion. And last week, I know you and I were chatting about Google announcing more specifics about the cookieless world in 2022. And I consider you a real expert in the field. And I know it's multifaceted, but I'd love to just broad strokes. Is this a good thing for consumers? Is it a good thing for advertisers and agencies? I know it's a big hairball, but what are your thoughts on Google's recent announcements regarding cookieless world in 2022?
Well, bear in mind that Google's announcement week before last, it didn't contain a lot new,
Right.
all right, in respect to how they're going to market. What they said was that they, without a doubt, will not pursue a user level identity graph solution a la some of what the competitive marketplace is doing. And quite frankly, a lot of what is going to transpire over the next year, it's still chapters that are being written. Yes, we have initiatives like Turtle Dove that Google is championing. Trade Desk is talking about handing over, not even talking about, but preparing to hand over the unified ID technology that they are building to an independent consortium in order to make that an alternative to other tracking technologies. And then you ask again, is this good for consumers? Is this good for advertisers? Is it good for the industry? There's no clear answer on that, unfortunately. I will say that our philosophy at the agency and my own philosophy is that I would like to see consumers be more in control of what is happening to their data. I'd also like them to be more educated on what value their data brings. I think that's unfortunately been a bit inconsistent in the industry. There's some areas where you can make a very strong argument. I can read publications that I used to have to pay for in the offline world for free, thanks to advertising. All right, fairly clear value exchange. But that's not the case across the board. And I think a bit of a leveling of what that looks like is in the offing, would certainly benefit consumers. A good advertiser will respect the consumer. Will think about what the consumer wants. The buzzwords for the last 4 or 5 years have been customer experience. Well, that's going to include how a company interacts with their data. Overall, this will be good for advertisers. We just don't know how yet. Advertisers should have the ability to understand what the return on their marketing investment is. All right. I'm not going to go so far as to say that's a fundamental right, but that should be a function of what marketing is able to provide. And, the means the industry has used to deliver that thus far in the, 26, 7 years that the web has been around, they weren't really designed to do that. Cookies were never designed to be pressed into service to do what they're doing now. And so, why I believe this ultimately will be a good thing for advertisers is that, new infrastructure will build up that ultimately does a better job of respecting consumers' privacy, delivers more accurate and persistent results for advertisers, with respect to measurement, perhaps with respect to targeting, and ideally is something that also accounts for various types of proprietary technology, the so called walled gardens that are springing up. Um, Now, all that said, there's certainly a lot going on in the regulatory world. We have the Department of Justice paying more attention to our industry than ever before. We have an era where advertising has become politicized. It's something that really hadn't happened before the last couple of years. You think about the debates over Section 230. You think about the debates over, Twitter's role in political discourse. It's a new world, and because of that, we're going to have some uncertainty around a lot of these topics for the coming future. And again, what's going to be key in being able to navigate that world is being able to see around corners and being able to react.
So you mentioned, and we talk about consumer privacy, it's paramount. We try to respect that. And in the past, there was a clear value exchange. If you want this content, you have to share a little bit of data. But you said privacy is a luxury good, and you've mentioned that there's like this advertising caste system. I'm fascinated by that. Could you expound on that a little bit?
So, first of all, this is not me coming up with this. This is a lot of people talking about this. If you go listen to Scott Galloway for over 5 minutes, he's going to bring this part up. Specifically, what we're talking about is, some of the strategies that companies like Apple are taking, where, they are really promoting consumer privacy as a differentiating factor in how their platforms operate versus their number one competitor, which just so happens to have a very large percentage of their revenue coming from advertising. And part of why myself, many others, have talked about this as privacy as a luxury good is that, Apple's products certainly are not the cheapest in the marketplace. All right. They are something that, if you look at all the data, typically follows affluence. So, I think that really, call it a concern, but, a positioning of that is that we are seeing a bit of privacy as a luxury. And I don't think that is something that many of us in the industry really want to see a shape up to. You should not have to pay to avoid various behaviors if that's what you want. There are regulations. I live in California, and part of what is designed in CCPA and it's soon to be enacted follow up CPRA is preventing that quote unquote caste system of privacy from taking hold. But right now, the marketplace is shaping up in that direction. Whether it will remain, it is TBD.
Well, it's an interesting conundrum, and there's a lot of hand wringing from platforms and ad tech companies that, if cookies go away, the entire industry is going to crumble. And then I look at it and I say, well, we have 40% of consumers that are on iOS and have Apple products. And so you've built this entire ad targeting system where you can't reach 40% of the market. And so, like, I understand there's a concern and there needs to be a better way in 2022 as presents us with new opportunities and challenges. But it just seems like you said, like third party cookies have been enlisted to do the bidding of ad tech companies and being used in ways they weren't designed for, that they weren't intended. And if you're an advertiser and you rely on them, you keep marketing to 60% of the people and you're not reaching 40% of the people. So I don't know, just as a layman, someone who's interested in this, I'm looking for a better way. I'm tend to be an optimist, but I'm hoping that we come up with ways that can ensure people's privacy and still allow advertisers to reach people with interesting offers. I don't know. Am I naive or is that about right?
Right. First of all, iOS and 40 to 50% of the market, depending upon where you happen to be sitting, you're still going to be able to reach people on iOS. You're just not going to be able to do it in the same way that you have become accustomed to doing it. And I think the bigger blind spot comes around measurement more than targeting necessarily. Despite what Apple is trying to do to put mechanisms in place, the first iterations need some improving upon if they're really going to become reliable for the industry. So you're still going to be able to do it. You're just going to have to do it a bit differently and maybe not as precise, maybe not as efficiently. All that said, one of the things that the industry has proven is that it's nothing if not resilient. And there's a lot of very smart people, there's a lot of solid investment that is out there looking for a solution that attempts to solve a lot of, call them the imbalances, but, solve a lot of the challenges that we've lived with for over a quarter century. And again, consumers, I'm not going to say the value exchange doesn't exist. It absolutely does. It's inconsistent in how it exists across the industry. But consumers have benefited tremendously from the advertising world in digital over the past 25 years. And I'm certainly not predicting some type of revolt if all of a sudden the world turns into a paywall. All that said, there's certain institutions that have also suffered pretty substantially under this new world. Think of journalism. Think of all of different news organizations. What's the phrase? Offline dollars for digital pennies. This is casting a world that I think ultimately portends that a number of companies come out stronger in an era where the value exchange is more well defined, and the mechanisms to really deliver advertising on both the consumer and advertisers terms are thought heavily about versus just kind of built over time.
Backstage with the Brand is proudly sponsored by Nativo. Nativo is architecting the future of advertising with the world's most advanced platform for content. For advertisers, Nativo enables brand storytelling at scale. For publishers, Nativo provides monetization with seamless and engaging ad formats. Together, Nativo's platform creates a better form of advertising. To learn more, visit nativo.com.
Did you follow that whole thing in Australia where there was a brinksmanship where the Australian government was forcing Facebook and Google to pay journalists or publishers for their content, and Facebook's like, no, we're not going to do it. And then like cooler heads prevailed, and a week later, there's news back in the news feed. But like, do you think government has the right or the responsibility to have these large platforms and walled gardens pay for the content that they're distributing? Or is that something that would just never happen in the United States?
Well, now you're getting into the philosophy behind antitrust law, and it's there's different schools of thought here. Antitrust law in this country over the past, I wouldn't say 100 years. It's really been starting to crystallize this way since the 1970s. Antitrust law has always tried to protect against consumer harm. And, if you go by that litmus test, then anything that a consumer gets for free should be encouraged. Facebook being able to leverage the content from other publications, being able to leverage the economic value that those publications are providing by that consumer harms test, hey, they should be able to do it all day long. But that's one school of thought. Another school of thought in antitrust law is that it should be employed to level the playing field to some extent, to prevent certain companies from becoming so powerful that they make business untenable for other companies. And that's a bit of what I've referred to with respect to some of the things that the digital world has done to content producers over the years. I do, and again, I'll throw out that, this is my opinion, not necessarily that of my agency nor of my clients, is that I do think government has a role in ensuring a very healthy and competitive industry. I do think there are imbalances that exist within our industry now. It's not the fault of any of the quote unquote winners in those imbalances right now. They're just doing what capitalism says they should be doing, and they're executing as beautifully as any company in history has. Chalk it up to a lot of that. But in many ways, they are riding the coattails of a lot of investment, hard work, sweat, tears, etc., going on outside their walls. And so it's not going to be up to me as to how government responds to that. But it's certainly at the crux of a lot of what's going on and what I would suspect the debate will entail in the next 1 to 3 years as, again, a new kind of regulatory and politicized world continues to infiltrate advertising.
Yeah. Well, since neither of us are antitrust lawyers, let's pivot to something that you have a little bit more direct control over. So you're an agency with great clients, and you reach out to partners and you say, I'm going to build a plan for the benefit of my clients. And there's this sort of intrinsic balance between execution, saying, hey guys, this is the plan, I need you to execute, and on the flip side, bring me an idea that I hadn't thought of, and maybe that can make the plan. And so, this idea of big ideas or new ideas versus executing the plan, like how does your team assess those things?
Well, what's the old saying? You can do something fast, you can do something cheap, you can do something good, but you can't do all three, pick two. We've largely lost that freedom in all of business. All right. It's not, I'm not going to say agencies have lost that. All businesses in a hyper competitive world don't necessarily have that quote unquote luxury that they used to. I do think for something, again, digital, go back to what I'd said previously, it's not a smartphone, it's not a laptop, it's a way of working. It is a much more complex way of working for the good and bad that go along with that. And so, where great creative and great media minds have, always been able to deliver strong ideas that propel a brand above and beyond where it currently sits in a marketplace. What is becoming more and more critical, of course, is how well you execute on those ideas. And the way that I look at it, it requires one to think more carefully about their teams and about the different roles that people play within their teams. I think Peter Drucker, you've probably heard of, somebody that I read religiously. He's unfortunately passed on, but I'll reread him. He used to describe teams in, three different ways. You had a baseball team, think of that, where everybody really was an individual and, kind of playing their own part. He used another analogy, which is kind of a doubles team in tennis. Here you're more coordinated, but you still have your individual roles. And theoretically, somebody's playing the back, somebody's playing the front. They can do that independently at times. And then his last piece was, kind of the jazz quartet, where if you're doing your job right, you know what the gentleman who's playing bass is going to do before he does it. And, in a world where ideas and execution need to walk more tightly in hand than they ever had before, one really needs to think about the different roles that teams play in that operation. It's unreasonable to expect that, you're going to have one or two folks who are great ideators also, be someone who would know, agile development processes and can write 10 races in their sleep. No, you really have to understand the specialties required for any given assignment and ideally put those specialties together in a way that doesn't compromise any one of those pieces. And I think that, again, from my own philosophy, execution does become a more important part of what agencies are going to provide. It's always been something that has allowed our value to persist is the ability to get something that would take mere mortals 5 hours to get it done in three. All right. And,
Mhm.
by hook or by crook. But
Well, it's interesting because you said digital is complicated, and it is. And so you need to be able to execute and buy programmatically and reach the audiences that the plan calls for. And at the same time, if it's a product launch, you need to create demand and sell the brand and build the brand and come up with something interesting. So like every media mix has different components to it. And I don't know if that's a baseball team or a doubles team or a string quartet. I don't know what Peter Drucker analogy you're going with for a media plan, but maybe I should just ask you. Like, let me ask you this. Obviously, reaching audiences, relevant audiences at scale, absolutely makes sense. But what's the role of either content or deep integrations on a key partner? Like, are those things going away, or is there a place for them in the media mix?
they're not at all going away. Look, first and foremost, you better do something interesting. At the end of the day, it's certainly not advertising's sole job to entertain. It's one of its jobs. Its job is to inform, its job is to reassure. I won't even go into it. Whip out Maslow's triangle and you can figure out all kinds of jobs advertising is designed to do. But if you look at content in general,
Mm-hmm.
somebody once said, old independent movie director Sam Fuller, what's the most important thing to a good story? His answer was a story. And likewise, you have to be able to do something interesting, maybe not every time, but often enough to captivate the consumer into understanding really what your brand means, what you're trying to accomplish, and most importantly, why a consumer should take their hard earned dollars and hire your brand for whatever particular purpose that is. So, in a world where execution certainly becomes more important, no, it doesn't mean that everything all of a sudden then becomes commoditized and programmatic and the creativity washes out of it. You still have to be able to accomplish a lot of those things. I think, one of the things that excites me the most is thinking about the way we've done things, thinking about how you do content executions. And, what I do more and more in my job these days is not partnerships or ensuring we have the lowest rates. We have plenty of people that do that. I do more and more about how can I take this process and apply technology and apply the know-how of our teams and do something in 5 steps that used to take 10. And in doing so, not do it just because it's cheaper, but do it because it's better. Do it because I reduce the risk of error. I think that all aspects of what we do need to continue to evolve, need to continue to get better. Extremely important when you're doing something that complex. The people that can simplify the complex are the people that are going to rule the world.
So interestingly, at Canvas, you got this big job. It's EVP and Chief Digital Officer, but you look at the entire media mix. And we talked about TV in the past, but like, do you sort of like just generally speaking, is the role of TV to create demand and beauty and build brand and like sight, sound, and motion on a big ass TV? By the way, you said you had like a 55-inch TV. Greg, I think you're selling yourself short. You seem to be the kind of guy who has an 80-inch TV. But
Not true.
you know what I'm
Not true, actually.
really?
No,
What are you married or something? And you went for the small TV?
no, no, no. It's, TV replacement cycles are long. This is well known.
Okay, so
This is
you've
well known.
okay. All right. Well, looking forward to you getting that big one. But my point is this: is like you might use television and video for creating demand and piquing interest, and then you might use digital further downstream to book appointments or test drives or something like that. Is that generally how you think of the media mix, or can digital be part of that branding, demand generation, intent, engagement?
You know, I'm not going to even say once upon a time because it still goes on and they still have value. You had personas of consumers, you had the scenarios of how those consumers walk through their media day, what's the role of a particular channel supposed to be at any given time. I don't want to say the problem with it, but one of the things that we've seen is that, consumers didn't get the memo. And the idea that one type of media serves a particular purpose for an entire swath of consumers, it doesn't necessarily hold water. Yes, there's certain things that a video message can do that maybe a display message can't by the amount of information and the type of information that you're able to transmit with it. At the same time, a younger consumer is going to be more adept at receiving messages in a shorter form, perhaps purely from display, than maybe older consumers like myself who grew up on 15 and 30-second spots and kind of had that expectation of what they're doing. And oh, by the way, changes in one's cognitive ability certainly play into this. But it doesn't.
Hold on. Wait, let me ask, because I'm older than you, and so like we're talking about cognitive decline. I can probably speak to that. But do you think it's a youth thing, or what does Canvas think about? Like, I guess it started with Vine with like 6 or 8 seconds, and now it's on Snap and Instagram. Like, is there value to a 6 second spot, or do brands really need 30 seconds to tell their story?
you know that's not an easy answer. It depends on your story. All right. Is there value? Is there a value in a 6 second spot? Absolutely. The data is there. And, if there wasn't, they would have disappeared by now. But, the flip side is actually true.
Do you think it might have to do with, if you're a strong brand, it's a frequency message, then 6 seconds is okay. But if it's a weak brand or a completely new product that's like a new market changer, you need the 30 seconds. Is that how you think about it?
It's one factor. All right. Certainly, a recognizable brand has more license in that it doesn't have to work as hard to explain itself. But I would say it also depends on what your product has to do in a consumer's mindset. Different verticals require a long story to talk about their value, their differentiation, why, again, that consumer should hire that particular company. Here's the hard part is that the requirements of that story are not uniform. Different people buy products for vastly different reasons. And so where 6 seconds could be adequate, I used age before as a dimension, but it's not the only one. 6 seconds could very well be adequate for somebody who just so happens to be well versed in the healthcare space, well versed in the financial services space. Whereas another consumer, a 30-second spot may not get that done. May need to be advertorial, may need to be something completely different, may need to be a recommendation from Uncle Bill. Let's not discount word of mouth is still alive and strong in this day and age.
Yes. Yeah. Can we talk cars for a minute? I know, you have Genesis and Hyundai and Kia. We don't have to specifically talk about those, but like I have lust for the GV80 because it's a beautiful car. And to me, if I saw a 6 second spot, 3 seconds on the outside and 3 seconds on that quilted Argyle interior that's so sick and luxurious, you got me. I just wanted to say that. I just love that car, and I love cars. And there's been this big push toward EVs, and everybody is saying we're going to be EV by 2025 or 2035. Do you think that's realistic?
Well, first of all, we are seeing an acceleration of this trend. And I do believe it's realistic that, the internal combustion engine becomes the exception, not the rule. There's still certainly challenges in the EV marketplace to solve. Again, you have terms bandied about range anxiety. Well, that's dropped. But again, there's still going to be aspects of the EV vehicle that will need to improve in order to achieve what we've largely been used to with internal combustion engines. Somebody like me, who to some extent loves the roar of an engine, that's something that, well, yeah, an EV might be able to replicate it, but maybe it's not the same. But again, I am wholly different than a younger generation who is growing up that certainly understands that climate change is something they're going to have to deal with for a lot many more years than maybe you and I. And so the importance of zero emissions takes on a whole different and greater role than it necessarily might for some others. And therefore, it propels that market.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I'm a car guy and I love cars, and I used to love the roar of the engine, and then I got a Tesla and now I love the roar of the silence and the torque and all that stuff, right? But let me ask you this about besides EVs, there's this push toward autonomous vehicles. And I'm just like, I like driving, right? I mean, and so do you think autonomous vehicles are being pushed by tech nerds and venture capital? Or is it such a huge value proposition for the consumer to be able to text and drive or drink? And I don't even know what you would use autonomous vehicles.
Well, let me ask you this question. You like driving, but do you love traffic?
That's true. That's there. Yes.
All
Okay.
right.
Okay.
So, and traffic, yeah, to some extent it's caused by cars, but really what's traffic is caused by is the space between cars. All right. And, I live in Los Angeles, known for a little bit of traffic over here. You know, the ability that autonomous driving could bring that would allow you to put three times as many vehicles in a particular space of road at a particular speed than you can do now will become very compelling for many, you and I included.
No, you're absolutely right, because I thought the analog would be okay. I'm used to cruise control, so I'd use autonomous driving for cruise control. But that's not the use case. The use case is for what I hate about driving, which is stop and go traffic and getting through cities and things like that. And that's what autonomous vehicles, that's their value proposition.
Well, there's a lot of use cases, and it will be a transformative technology for society. You can read forecasts that autonomous vehicles will theoretically do away with parking lots. What does that mean to the urban landscape if all of a sudden you've just opened up 30% of the space in a downtown urban area that was devoted to letting a vehicle sit for 8 9 hours a day? What could that mean for the elderly? Oh, by the way, there's a big demographic shift going on in this country, in the Western world, if we haven't taken aware of that. What's that going to mean for people that in their 70s or 80s might have lost their freedom to go about anywhere without the ability to have autonomous driving?
So in this case, you don't need to park your car at your office. The car takes you there and then it goes and waits for you 10 miles outside the city or whatever. Or if you're an elderly person, it'll drop you off at the hospital, wait somewhere else, and then you'll be summoned back.
Or, you let it go out and make you money throughout the day as a rideshare vehicle.
Yeah.
And again, how well that actually transpires, we will obviously see. And it doesn't mean that there's going to be no parking in the future. I'm sure people will certainly want to have their car at their beck and call if necessary. But there's a lot of transformative aspects of autonomous driving above and beyond, oh, I can consume more media in the car. Therefore, we should move towards that. Certainly from my vantage point. Oh, good, another screen. It is something that I think continues to go, and the shifts for society are going to be profound, both in good, but also, things that are going to need to remake society. There's a lot of Americans these days employed in the transportation industries that theoretically may not have a job in 20 years. What are you going to do with the 6 7 million people that serve the trucking industry, serve the public transit industry now? These are questions that government and society are just now starting to tackle.
Well, the last subject that we need to tackle, which is unrelated to cars or should be unrelated to cars, is you're kind of known as a enophile, right? You love your wine, and I'd love to pick your brain a little bit because I love wine too, but I get a little lazy. I probably drink cab more than I should because it's my go-to. Any varietals or regions that you would love to get our listeners stoked about?
Well, I'll start off by saying I named my dog Brunello. So, and not after the fashion designer, since we get that one a lot too.
Okay, all right.
I like our Italian wines, most definitely. My wife and I were married in Italy a few years ago, so it's always been near and dear to our heart. So, definitely if you are a big cab drinker, look into not only Brunellos, but one of the ways to try them is their younger cousin, a varietal called Rosso di Montalcino. These are what's known as baby Brunellos. A Brunello needs to be aged for 5 years before it is officially a Brunello. Rosas are a bit younger. They're more accessible, and you can try them and get quite a bit of what you can get out of that. I am still a big cab fan. Spend time in the Napa Valley. Lucky to be a Californian and get to be able to do that. And there's quite a bit of variety up there in terms of the cabs that one can get. I won't do any advertising here, but there's a vineyard that we spent a lot of time at that also kind of skews Italian in how they raise their cabs, and so they also do Sangioveses in the valley, which is fairly rare.
Mm.
So we're big fans of those.
All right, good advice. Well, look, Greg, fascinating stuff. A lot to look for. Geez, the year we went through, and then looking at 2022, it's just going to be more disruption and change. But I think for the better. Let's hope. But thanks for your insights. Good times, and we'll talk again soon.
Absolutely. A pleasure chatting with you guys today.
Okay. Thanks, Greg. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us on Backstage with the Brand. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and maybe learned a little something. If you liked today's episode, please consider sharing with a friend, rating the segment, or subscribing to Backstage with the Brand. Special thanks to our sponsor, Nativo, as they architect the future of advertising. Thanks for listening, and remember, no matter where you go, there you are.